Awesome. Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much for having me to help close out this event. I've heard some very, very good things about all the things that you're covering in terms of content and community. And so I really just want to kind of share a little bit about the latest version, which I'm sure a few of you know a lot about, but I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page. And then I'll end off talking a little bit about the future. So before I get into things, I want to introduce myself. So my name is Stephen Fluin, and I lead developer relations for the Angular team here at Google. And I have a really fun job because my two jobs basically are to help developers and organizations be successful with Angular. And then second, is to understand what it's like to be sitting on the other side of this screen, right? Sitting in the room with you, working at my job all day, trying to deal with this wide, crazy, wacky world of technology. And really, in many ways, stop focusing on the technology and kind of get back to work and try and focus on creating value for my users. And so trying to represent all of those needs and all of those values onto the Angular team so that as we continue to evolve the platform, we're taking that into account, we're representing that across the board. So today, I just want to share a few brief things about Angular's perspective, kind of how we see the world, because I think the better you understand how we see the world, the better you can understand what we're doing and kind of why we're doing it. Then I'm going to go into some of the features and capabilities of version 8, and we'll actually do some live coding. And then we will talk briefly about the future of Angular and kind of where we're headed. So let's dive in. So I love to begin almost every presentation with this list of values, where these values really represent and give you insight into the sorts of ways that we prioritize our work. So first, we have apps that users love to use, because at the end of the day, although we care about developers, everyone in this room is really working to benefit a user. No matter what application you're building, no matter what software you're building, we ultimately do this for the humans that are around us. And so we think that that's a really important thing to acknowledge because we want to empower you to be serving your users as well. But at the same time, we definitely care about developer experience. So making it possible for you to be successful at your job, making it easy to take advantage of the superpowers that this JavaScript ecosystem offers us. And lastly, we care about a community where everyone feels welcome. And this is really, really critical to our success. If you look back over the last 10 plus years, even back into the days of AngularJS, we have been very, very successful because of the people in our community. Because we're not doing this alone. We have contributors, we have people filing issues, we have people that are building on top of us, libraries and tools and documentation and consultancies. All of these things are part of what make us successful. And so I want to acknowledge just a couple pieces of that community. So the first thing I want to acknowledge is a group out there called NG Girls, which is a fantastic organization that's focused on training kind of new developers and making them effective in Angular. And so if you check out nggirls.org, they actually have events now all over the world. And if there isn't an event in Italy yet, which I'm not sure if there has been one, but I would really kind of look to everyone in this room to say, hey, is this something that would be value to us? And maybe work together to volunteer to put together one of these events. The other thing that I love, especially in my job, where part of my job is to just kind of follow what's going on across the internet, is that I see new tools and new communities pop up every single day. Whether it's this tool that I'm showing on the screen, which is a tool called XLayers, which is from a gentleman named Wasim, where he built a tool to visualize sketch files as kind of in an Angular application as Angular components. And the level of kind of just innovation there, I just really love, because he's solving problems for himself and for his community, problems that we don't see because we're not trying to solve those same sorts of things. And this is kind of a really essential point of why Angular is so successful. But we also see this kind of across the board, right? Every day new communities are popping up. I think if you look across the world this year, there was something like 8 or 9 new Angular conferences, everywhere from Germany to Malaysia, all across the board. And so this community is very, very essential to everything we do. We do releases every 6 months, and in the beginning we got a little bit of flack for this, but I think a lot of the community has kind of gotten on board with some of the things that we're doing, where we do releases every 6 months. And so the benefit there is that you actually have a high degree of predictability about what's coming in Angular. And because we follow semantic versioning, you can always know exactly what to expect. So we only do any sort of breaking changes twice a year. And so teams plan around this, teams build into this. But just because we can do breaking changes twice a year doesn't mean we want to break anyone. We actually spend a huge amount of our time, I would say almost the majority of our time, making sure that the entire community can go with us as we continue to evolve and build out Angular. And so for the kind of history since 2.0, every major release has been easier than the last. And one of the examples of this, one of the stories that we're hearing is that because the majority of that, because we're putting all this work into it, the majority of the applications use the latest. So as of 8, the majority of applications out there were on 7. As of 7 coming out, the majority of applications were on 6. So how many people here are on version 7 today? Awesome. How many people are on version 8 today? Awesome. So this is a great opportunity for us here today. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is we're really trying to pull the entire ecosystem with us. So we feel like we have this really unique opportunity because we're so opinionated, because we control the kind of end-to-end Angular experience in many ways. We have the opportunity to keep everyone up to date. And the way that we do this is that we try and automate with schematics and the commands ng-add, ng-update, those sorts of things. Because we actually, at Google, how it works is that there's over 1,000 Angular projects in Google. And because our team brought Angular into Google, we're actually responsible for keeping those applications up to date as we make breaking changes. So basically the rule is if we break someone else's tests, we have to go and fix it. And the effect of this is that we could not go and fix 1,000 applications manually. Right? That's just not sustainable as the number continues to grow. And so within Google, we have to have really, really good tools to automate this process. And so what we're doing is we're using those same automation tools to bring the entire ecosystem with us. And another kind of really important part of that is that we don't just want to do this with Angular. We want everyone in this room to do this, where if you're building a library that's consumed by another team, you're building a tool, you're building applications, you're building standards, all these sorts of things, we want you to bring everyone with you as well. And so that's why we've baked in all these great schematics tools into things like ng-update so that you can bring your ecosystem with you as well. One of the stories that we've heard is that, for example, Fidelity, the bank, the investment company, they actually keep their entire company up to date with their component library by using schematics. And so everyone follows the same standards, everyone follows the same practices, all of the code across the company from all these various different teams looks similar because they're doing this. And another part of us pulling the ecosystem with us is really trying to embrace the future, because how we build JavaScript applications is not fixed. And part of this is because user expectations aren't fixed. And so Angular is really trying to embrace the future and bring kind of everyone along with us. So one of the teams that's doing this really well is Air France at KLM. They actually did this really great blog post about how it took them a day to update the full platform to version 7. And how they wanted to do it even faster with version 8. We should definitely check in with them to see how their 8.0 update went. But we want to get to a point where we stop talking about the version numbers in many ways. So the version numbers will always be there, right? Like we still talk about Chrome 76, Chrome 77, but for most use cases, we just want it to be, it's just Angular, right? If you write a blog post on how to use forms, it's going to be pretty similar year to year to year. If you write a blog post about how to do templates, how to do components, all these sorts of kind of core technology pieces, they're not changing very quickly. And then that's by design, because while we still want the ability to innovate and change things and make things better, we want to make sure that we're keeping all of your knowledge viable and all of your knowledge accurate as we continue to change things. And if you're an Angular developer, life is actually pretty awesome now. If you look back over the last few years, we now have the CLI. We have these things like differential loading that landed with polyfills in version 7.3, I think. We have this really strong idea about dependency management where you can use ng-add and ng-update to invert the relationship with your dependencies and give them more of the responsibility. We have really good accessibility on all our components and tools to allow you to do that. And we really try and make it easy to both upgrade from AngularJS and to stay up to date in Angular. Angular's got a huge amount of momentum. So we grew over 50% in 2018. And so kind of Angular continues to explode. The Angular adoption continues to kind of impress us. So thank you to everyone in this room. So now what I want to do is I want to turn over to Angular today. So we just, as you know, released in the last few weeks version 8. And version 8 is both kind of a technology piece, but there's also a few community pieces that are going on. one of the things that we're doing is we are focusing on this idea of a collaborators program. So historically, there were kind of the Angular team, which included our team, a few contractors. We had a whole bunch of people from the community that actually dedicate their full time to our team. But then we have all these kind of fantastic GitHub contributors. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to find a way to elevate the kind of open source contributors that find us on GitHub. And so we've created this collaborators program to help mentor and to help support contributors that are active in our repository. So the basic idea is that we're finding the top contributors that are just kind of coming in, helping us triage issues, helping us send PRs, get PRs in, and we want to give them a little bit more support. We want to help mentor them, help them get their PRs in, help them understand where Angular is going so that they can be more effective, which is ultimately going to help the entire ecosystem. So taking this idea of like open source and anyone can come and join us a little bit further so that we're not just letting these things come in the front door, but we're kind of guiding them in and helping the whole community. All right, so let's talk about version 8. So one of the headlining features is called differential loading. And this is actually a trick that's based on just kind of this emergent browser thing capability where if you put a module on a script and then a no module attribute on a script, we can actually load conditionally different JavaScript in the browser. And I'm going to actually give a demo of this in a little bit. But the magic here is that as of 7.3 in our CLI, we were doing this with polyfills. And now in version 8, we're actually doing this with all of the bundle. And the idea is we're going to do 2 builds. We'll do a build of modern JavaScript ES 2015, or possibly later if you so desire. And then we'll also do a legacy build of ES5. And so depending on the amount of modern JavaScript you use, you can actually save a huge amount of bundle size, and I'll come back to that. One of the other changes is that we've actually moved to a web standard route config. So how many people here have used lazy loading in Angular? Okay. If it's not every hand, it should be every hand, because we really, really recommend this for virtually all applications. But one of the things that a lot of folks didn't know is that how we did lazy loading previously in the router wasn't based on standards at all. So you had this load children string that we would actually resolve as part of our build. And so we had to write a bunch of custom Webpack code to do this. We had to write a bunch of custom TypeScript to do this. And what this meant was that if you fat-fingered a module, right, like you misspelled your module, there was no tooling support to help you know that that was a mistake in your editor. And so what we've done in version 8 is we've added and made the default that you should now be using these web standard dynamic imports. So instead of just pointing at a string, which has no type completion, has no knowledge of whether or not that's right or wrong, we now use imports. And whether you're using VS Code, whether you're using WebStorm, these tools know how to resolve these import paths. And so when you say about.module, it actually knows what that is, and it actually looks in that file, figures out the symbols that are available. And then in that promise resolution, the then there, we actually refer directly to the symbol in that file. And so we get this very, very nice type completion. And we actually were able to, or at least as soon as the deprecation period's over, we'll be able to remove all that custom build code and then just kind of support the ecosystem standard. And what will happen is, especially in the future, is these dynamic imports will actually open up a whole bunch of new avenues for developers. And so really good support using these industry tools is very important to us. All right, so now I'm going to dive into some live coding. So this is my son. He did the demo this morning, so I'm going to try and do it as good as he did. So what we're going to do is I want to jump into an Angular CLI project that was using version 7, and I want to update it to version 8. Then we're going to try and take a look at what differential loading does for our application. And then I want to show you what we're doing under the hood with schematics related to the route config. So let's go ahead and take a look at this application. So this is an application that I built that is very, very simple. So we have an app component with a couple links. You've got home and about. You've got a routing module that knows how to route to home, and you've got about as a lazy loaded module here. Let me make sure this is big enough so that everyone can see it. And then in the lazy module, you have just a single about component. So a very, very simple application. This will probably take you about 5 to 10 minutes to build. And if we look at it in the browser, it looks a little bit like this. So we're on our local dev server. You've got home, you've got about. When you click, it switches the routes. And if you take a look at the network tab, when we actually hit the about route, it should load a separate chunk. So we're loading the about module. So all of that code is lazy loaded. And this is exactly how you should be doing most applications. But if we take a look, this is actually a version 7 application. So the application's a little bit out of date. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and use the tools to update it to version 8. So I'm going to say ng update at Angular core at Angular CLI. So these are the two packages we want to update. And what ng update does is it will go and look at all the peer dependencies that have changed between those two versions, and it will update them as well. So as you can see, we're updating Zone.js, we're updating RxJS, we're updating TypeScript. All those sorts of things are going to kind of come along with us automatically. The other thing it's doing is it's running schematics for any of the packages that get updated. And so when we update Angular core or Angular router, the Angular router actually knows how to go and update my application to take advantage of the latest and greatest. And same thing with core, same thing with material, all the different libraries. And we're seeing more and more libraries in the ecosystem actually do this. So as soon as our little npm yarn install finishes here, we should actually be able to take a look at all the changes. So it updated my TS-lint so that it knows how to target the modern browsers. It's updated our browsers list. It's updated our polyfills. So it's actually doing a whole bunch of work for me. And the idea that we want to get to is that this ng update command should basically do everything you need to get to the latest version. We have another tool out there called update.angular.io, which can walk you through the entire process. So if you want to do it more manually, you want to understand what's happening under the hood, you can definitely use this tool. It will show you, hey, here's some changes to selectors, here's the changes to the node version, all these sorts of things. So if you need a deeper understanding of what's going on, definitely check out update.angular.io. But in general, what we want is we want this to just kind of happen for you automatically. And so if we go look into our app component, we'll see nothing's changed here. But if we look in our routing module, it's actually replaced that string import now with the automatic import. And so this is where you get that completion that I was talking about, right? So TypeScript knows what's in this file, and so it knows if app module or about module is actually valid. So that's actually one of the big changes. And we can really see this change if we do a ng build -- prod. And so what you'll see, the first thing you'll notice is builds take a tiny bit longer, because what we're actually doing now is we're doing two builds. We're doing an ES 2015 build, and we're doing a ES5 build. And the benefit here, as I said, is we're shipping down the smallest package to the browser that it can, that we believe we can ship. Because when you write all of this great JavaScript with decorators and classes and things like that, these are, especially the classes and the imports, those are all valid ES 2015, but older browsers don't know how to support those. And so one of the things you can do is you can actually take a look at the TypeScript playground, and you can actually see what happens when you do things. So if I, for example, may say class my class, this modern ES 2015 actually gets converted into this classic ES5, right? So it's much more verbose. Depending on the features you use, it can be many, many times more verbose. And so by shipping and doing two separate builds, we actually get to take advantage of both of those with the browser doing the selection. So we don't actually ever transfer anything over the network that's not targeted to that browser. And so this is a strategy that actually, again, came from the community. It was a contributor named Manfred Steyer actually built a version of this, and then we worked with him to bring that into the core of Angular. So while we wait for this, I'm going to show you one more thing here. So if you wanted to actually configure, so if you, for example, didn't like that differential loading, which I don't know why that would happen, but you can actually take a look at your TS config, and you can see here's how we target. And so if you just wanted to ship ES5 to everybody, because that's what was important for you, you can actually just switch this back to ES5, and we'll automatically, based on this target, build the right things for your application. So we can see here that it has actually finished the ES5 build, and you're going to get all these files that are, say, -ES5. And then as soon as the ES 2015 build finishes, we'll get the exact same thing with -ES 2015. And this applies to not only your polyfills, which was what we had in 7, but all of the rest of your application, and including Angular itself. All right, so we've taken a look at updating our project from 7 to 8. We basically just ran one command and everything happened for us. We showed off a little bit about differential loading, and then we went into standards-based route config. So there's a whole bunch of other capabilities that landed in 8. Obviously, we are always trying to push the whole ecosystem forward. If you wanted to build and use web workers for any sort of kind of intensive processes that you wanted to offload from the main thread, we have web worker generation and bundling support. So you just do ng generate web worker. One of the things we've done is we've actually improved the story for teams that are using AngularJS. How many people here are still touching AngularJS code? Okay, yeah. So there's a few of you, and this is something that we're aware of, and we're continuing to try and improve the bridges between AngularJS and Angular. And so what we did is we actually made the $location service in AngularJS compatible with Angular. So if you're mixing these two things, they can actually share location and share control of the browser's URL bar and history instead of fighting over it. So that's a really good thing. And we've made it easier to lazy load in AngularJS. So the idea that we want to get people to is that you're building an Angular application where if you still have legacy pieces, parts of your application capabilities that you don't really touch very often, you should be able to lazy load those in. We also see we've shipped a bunch of new experimental components as part of the CDK and material. You can check those out in the repo. It's just called CDK experimental or material experimental. One of the things that we're doing under the hood there is that we're actually working really closely with the material design team because they have a new implementation of these components that they're working on where they're kind of exposing the bare underlying JavaScript. And so we're looking at how do we ship kind of the same API that we have today with Angular Material, but taking advantage of their work on the JavaScript and the styling. This will also help ensure consistency across applications, even if you use different technologies. If you write schematics yourself, we've actually introduced a few new APIs in our CLI. So you can actually modify the workspace via a programmatic API instead of just loading the Angular JSON file via your kind of JSON and file system tools. And one of the most important parts of V8 for people that are building libraries and people that are contributing to the ecosystem is that we've released a set of APIs that we call the builder APIs that really let you tap into how Angular does build. So you can think of schematics as connected to commands like ng-new, ng-serve, ng-generate, and then you can think of builders as what is running ng-build, ng-serve, ng-test, those sorts of things. And so you can think of this as kind of us expanding our scope. So if you go all the way back to AngularJS, that was really focused on rendering. But then flash forward to now where we added kind of more of the end-to-end story, right? Now we do scaffolding, now we help you test, now we build. Angular applications look like good applications day one instead of 3 months later you finally added some minification or some productionization of your code. And so we really want to continue expanding that. So we looked at kind of the developer lifecycle and we found out that most developers wake up in the morning and go to sleep at night. And so we're looking where could we help here? And so one of the areas is once you've actually built your application, you actually have to go and serve that application. And so one of the things we've been doing is we've been working with partners like Firebase, like Azure, like Netlify to use these new builder APIs to integrate, build, and deploy. So as of 8, if you ng add AngularFire and you run this ng run command, it combines build and deploy. And we're doing this in a way that tries to make it simpler for most developers, but also enables teams that want to do this themselves, right? You have some custom process that you have to do for your deployment script. We want you to be able to invoke that as part of an integrated build process so that you're always building and deploying the latest in the way that you want to. And so this is actually a really exciting part of builder APIs. How many people here have heard of Project Ivy? Okay, most people. So I'll try and keep this Ivy section a little bit short. So if you think about the Angular rendering pipeline that we have today, so in 7 and it's default in version 8, you actually have this Angular renderer. It's almost an interpreter where we have all these capabilities, pipes, dependency injection, et cetera, and it pulls in your code and it executes your code kind of line by line by line. And what we've done in Ivy is we've really changed our compiler and our renderer to flip this around. So instead of Angular invoking your code, it's going to be your code invoking Angular. So your code is what pulls in the pipes, dependency injection, all those sorts of features. And this has a whole bunch of benefits. We're focusing first on compatibility. So as of, I think it was last week, we announced the Ivy opt-in preview. What we're really trying to do is we're trying to make sure that everyone can switch over to Ivy without really changing much of anything in their application. And then what we want to do is we want to take advantage of all these great properties of it. So if you try out Ivy today, your generated code is going to be smaller. Angular is itself a little bit bigger, but you are able to start leaving out parts of Angular you don't use. So this is definitely going to be a journey as we approach getting it set by default for most folks. So we're going to go back to live coding here. And what I want to do is I want to just show everyone how to opt into the Ivy preview. So we're going to take our existing application. As you can see, we did our ES5 build and our ES25 build, and we actually saved something like 35 KB, so that was pretty good. So what we're going to do, let's go ahead and commit this. And now I'm going to do the ng update command again, but this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Angular core --next. And so if anyone's wanting to try out Ivy, you should always be on the next version, because it is not yet a stable API. It's going to continue changing. We continue improving it. And so --next will always get you to the kind of the right version of Ivy, so that you're not dealing with kind of older versions, or you're not seeing the latest and greatest. So once you're on the latest version here, it's actually relatively simple. What you do is you just go in your tsconfig, and we're going to add in a new key. And so this key is going to be Angular compiler options. And you're going to say enable Ivy true. And that's it. So I'm now opted into the Ivy preview. And what's going to happen now is when I do an ng build or an ng serve, we're actually going to go and do what we call a compatibility compilation. So we're going to take all of your libraries that you have. So if you're using Material, if you're using Kendo UI, any Angular library, we want those to keep working without actually having to have them ship the updated instruction set. And so we actually go through your node modules and we recompile and we translate the old metadata that was used by the runtime into the set of instructions that Ivy expects. So this can take a little bit. We save this so the next time you don't actually have to do this process. And as you can see, because we're serving, it's doing the ES 2015 version. If you did a build of production because of differential loading, we'd actually do this for both the ES5 version and the ES 2015 version. And now we're just doing a traditional build. And what we should work, although this is a tech demo, so it's doomed to fail, is that my application just keeps working automatically. And now it's using Ivy, and we start to get some of those beneficial properties. All right, it looks like it is ready to go here. So you can see previously we were on version 7, and now when we refresh, about should still work. So we're still doing the lazy loading perfectly. My app continues to function, and we're on 8.1 next, and we're using Ivy. So that was a successful update. So hopefully it's just as easy for everyone else. And if it's not, definitely let us know, because this is really what we're focused on right now, is making sure that we can flip the switch for everyone in an upcoming version, probably version 5, but we don't make any guarantees about future. So it worked, and now what? That this is kind of where I think everybody's going to be in 3 months. But what are the benefits you're going to get in the future? So obviously smaller generated code is something we have now. So all of the code that you write is smaller. We're working very hard to optimize it so that if you don't use pipes, for example, we can leave out all that pipe code. If you don't use sanitization, we can leave out sanitization. All these sorts of things that are a little bit interesting. But even more than just leaving them out from tree shaking, one of our intentional design goals is that if you don't use all of Angular in your home route, let's not load it there, right? So what we found is that most Angular applications actually use all of Angular. And so the whole idea of leaving out parts of Angular not using, it's a little bit overhyped. But when it comes to lazy loading, that is a place that we can actually take advantage of this, right? If you have a very, very simple home route, we want that home route to be very, very fast and leave out the parts of Angular. And then let's only load the parts of Angular you need when you jump into an editor interface or when you jump into more complex parts of the application. We have something called locality, which I'll come back to, but the idea should be more incremental builds, easier lazy loading. So right now we have module lazy loading using the dynamic imports, as you've seen. But there's actually a huge amount of opportunities to do things like lazy loading of components, lazy loading of reducers, all those sorts of things once we get to an Ivy world. So one of the design goals of Ivy was that we should have locality. So right now when you want to build an Angular application, we actually have to have some global knowledge, because we have to resolve all the metadata. We have to go figure out all the selectors and how they match up based on the module that we're compiling. And we want you to be able to do more of this in isolation so that you can do incremental builds. So if we don't change a module of your application that someone else depends on, we don't want to have to recompile it. And so that's one of the kind of long-term design goals. If anyone has had to do any of the underlying work of doing like dynamic loading that works in both just-in-time mode, JIT mode, and ahead-of-time mode, or AOT, you've heard of this thing called an ng factory. So what we actually do is we convert every, today in the view engine renderer, the renderer that's default today, we actually convert every component, every module into a component ng factory or a module ng factory. And so sometimes you refer to it by the type and sometimes you refer to it by the factory. One of the big things that we've changed in Ivy is that we don't have factories anymore. We just store all of the metadata from the decorator as a static property on the class. So that's a big benefit that will make building sorts of advanced tools much, much easier. And our hope is that this will actually increase the surface area for contribution. Ivy in many ways simplifies the Angular code base, right? We have a compiler that's separate from an instruction set. So these things are a little bit decoupled with the hope that more people will both be able to contribute to Angular and to build on top of Angular, which is really, really essential to us. So what else does the future hold for us? So one of the things that we're continuing to kind of hold as one of our core missions is helping developers outside of Google build more like we do. And so Bazel is one of the ways that we do this. Bazel is the build system we use across Google to recompile everything from Angular applications to Angular itself, to Material, to Gmail, Cloud, all these sorts of giant applications that have tons and tons and tons of dependencies, all the way down to compiling all of our third-party code, like the Linux kernel or GCC, all those sorts of things. And so it's really designed for scale. We've been using it for over 10 years, but we're trying to make it work for the external world. And so we're really not trying to replace Webpack, because Webpack is kind of an essential part of the ecosystem, but we're trying to augment Webpack by helping it with the things that we know we can do very well. So in Bazel, we're very good at incremental builds, right? We can understand a dependency tree, whereas in Webpack, the build capabilities there, every build step actually requires global knowledge. And so it's very hard to make it incremental. It's very hard to optimize. And so we feel like Webpack plus Bazel is actually a really, really nice technology. And so the opt-in preview, we're going to be sending out the instructions out in the next week or so. We've actually, all this is live on the internet, so if you just kind of Google Angular Bazel, you can probably find it today. But we'll be trying to make this very, very easy for people to opt in and try it out. And there will actually be two modes. There will be a mode where everything works just like it does in the CLI, kind of we hide Bazel from you. And then there will be a more advanced mode where you can actually get Bazel files on disk, which is what would give you the capability to actually define these finer-grained build targets that all depend on one another. And that's where we feel like companies are going to get the biggest advantage, where when you know the hierarchy of your application, you can actually say, we don't need to rebuild this app unless this app changes, those sorts of things. And then you just write out build Bazel files out to disk, and then Bazel would use those to take advantage of those incremental builds, parallelization, all these sorts of great capabilities. One of the features that Bazel will unlock for a lot of developers is remote build execution. So why run your CI on one machine when you can use hundreds or thousands? So this is actually the only way Google's able to do what we do, right? If I had to build an Angular app with all the third-party source code all the way down to Node and TypeScript and all these things within Google on my own machine, I could never do that. But by having this kind of shared execution incremental build pool that's shared across Google, we can all be much, much more efficient. There's also lots of other exciting technologies that we're working towards. So there's a lot of interest right now in things like pre-rendering applications, doing more server-side rendering, and really expanding our opinionated approach out to deployment and serving, because we feel like Angular today is really, really good at helping JavaScript developers build and ship applications, but it's not really helping developers serve applications. And we've seen a huge number of teams make mistakes, like not doing content compression, not caching the files in the right way at the right times. And so we're kind of expanding our opinionation to include that serving level. And one area that we're actually working on this at the forefront of things is on Google Shopping Express, where the first time you load Google Shopping Express on mobile, you don't actually get an Angular application. You get a server-side rendered Angular application with a couple Angular elements in it. So just the pieces that need to be interactive are interactive. And then what we do is we download Angular in the background, bootstrap it in the background, and then on the first route transition, the first click that a user makes, that's a client-side transition, and we kind of blow away the DOM. And this is an advanced strategy that we want to make possible for everybody, because it has a number of different benefits, right? It improves the time to interactive on the application, it improves things like SEO, and it eliminates some problems that people have with like double rendering of ads with server-side rendering. So we really want to kind of combine the best of the server-side rendered world and the single-page application world, where we want fast user experiences, but also we want those experiences to be rich and have the richness and capabilities that users expect, which is kind of what drove us all to writing JavaScript in the first place. So we're definitely some vision here where we could do lazy loading that's triggered based on interactions, right? So we don't actually need the code for a button until you click on the button. Or we could at least use that heuristic of what user is interacting with to define a queue of things to load. We could care about things like component level hydration. We did a brief demo of this at Google I/O this year. And a lot of this is using Angular elements to handle the underlying bootstrapping and take advantage of what the browser offers. So we're really trying to kind of overall improve what it feels like to be a developer. We want more better. People love that Angular is so opinionated, that it's so batteries included. And so we feel like if we can dive into serving and performance out of the box, this makes using Angular feel even better as a developer. So we want to really move your applications, your companies forward while taking advantage of the way that Google's been doing things for a long, long time in a really agile, effective way that really delivers great results for users. So really try and remember that we're moving towards this idea of an evergreen Angular where we want people to stop using the version numbers except when talking about new features, right? Because we're all doing this together, right? We're all staying up to date, and it's just Angular, right? Your skills just get more and more valuable every day. I'm writing this blog post, or I have been for a while, about Angular 2038, which is like 1 billion JavaScript years, as I know. I really do think Angular is still going to be a really great way to build applications in 2038. And I know that's kind of an outlandish prediction. So what you should do is you should set a reminder on your calendar. So if you go to calendar, hit the letter G, you can type in 2038. And then what you can do is you can tweet me in 2038 and tell me how wrong I've been. So the last thing I just want everyone to remember is Angular is really sitting at the nexus of trying to give everyone the stability that they expect, and the innovation, and the best of the innovation is coming from the ecosystem so that our applications just get better and better. Thank you so much.